investigative reporter, senior writer for ESPN, and adjunct professor of journalism at Columbia University. TJ Quinn joins the show. TJ, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Former adjunct.
Former.
I still wear the T-shirts.
So you still go and advertise it?
But yeah, totally. But I just, hey, they probably listen. I don't want to.
Well, I do have a quick question for you about that, though. As somebody who has now taught journalism, what has been the reaction in the reporting world to social media, and how much harder has it made your job that athletes can now put out their own stories and don't need to put things out through journalists?
Oh my God, it's like reacting to the invention of electricity, or the discovery of it. It changed everything. When I was a baseball beat writer, my first year, 27 years ago, the social media, the internet really had nothing to do with anything. I got a son now who's a 24-year-old reporter, and look at, he's never known anything different. There's an immediacy, first of all, in the reaction to everything that you do. Back in the old days when I got into this and you wrote something and somebody didn't like it, you had to, maybe they would call and leave a voicemail, but you'd wait for that letter to show up in 3 days with a really hard block writing. So you knew they meant it when they wrote it. And now it's instant feedback from everybody, including the people that you cover. There's, I think, a lot of self-editing because people anticipate what the reaction is going to be. The fact that players were able to tell their stories in their own ways has changed the nature of journalism. I think it's something we were slow to recognize in our business, that we were able to tell those stories, and we were the gatekeeper because we controlled the gate. You forget, if you're keeping the gate, it's because there's a gate, and now everyone's got a gate. Everybody's a publisher. So it's forced, I think, our business, the instant gratification is for the hot takes. And, if you want to get attention and build a huge following, you say outrageous things to get response. But if you want to be a solid, classically journalistic source that people can turn to and trust, it's a lot harder. People aren't swayed by facts. They're swayed by what confirms their biases and their opinions. And so it's a much tougher environment. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
We'll move back to that and some of your other stories in a minute, but I wanted to get to why we had John today. Somebody who befriended our show, who we were lucky enough to have on a bunch of times and see in person, Pedro Gomez, who left us too soon. You are working with the Pedro Gomez Foundation to raise awareness. Before we talk the foundation, can you talk to our listeners about Pedro Gomez, the person?
Oh my God. Pedro was, I don't know that I've ever had a friend like him. We first met my first year covering baseball in 1996. And he was, it's fun. That's where I lose my words, is trying to talk about what he meant. I mean, he was one of my closest friends. He cared deeply about his job and what he did. And he cared about baseball, and he cared about athletes. He cared about doing things the right way. He was passionate about his job, but also supporting athletes who he felt deserved it. He had some famous battles with Curt Schilling, who a couple of your listeners might remember. And he didn't do it because he was doing it for the attention or just to pick a fight. It's because he hated the way Schilling conducted himself in the clubhouse and wouldn't take accountability. And he was going to do that. And the players in the clubhouse who did do things the right way saw how Pedro did his job, and they supported him and thanked him for the way he did his job. But as a friend, he was, oh my God, his son Rio, is a pitcher in the Red Sox system. He's in Double-A. And, when he first broke into professional ball in rookie league baseball, they were playing in Brooklyn, and I live in Jersey, and Pedro flew out. I picked him up. We come to the house. First thing he does is he grabs my youngest son, who's a ball player. Let's go right in the backyard. Let's see the swing. Let's grab the tee. When we went to the game that night, everybody in the ballpark knows who he is. They're all ball fans, and every single one of them, it's like some friend he just met. And when we went to see Rio after the game, he wanted to make sure that my son Mikey, got to meet him first, and that the two ball players would talk to each other like ball players. And every time my son pitched, if I didn't give Pedro updates quickly enough, he was harassing me. What's going on? What happened with that batter? It was 3-0 when you texted me. All three of my kids were, devastated when he died. But he was, I could go on forever, man. But he had just, you don't meet somebody with the kind of heart, honesty, integrity, passion that he's got, that he had. Somebody said it right after he died. It wasn't just, Pedro wasn't just one person's best friend. He was everybody's best friend. He was the best friend that she could have had.
That was from the first time that we met him, which was at a AA All-Star game in Trenton. Pedro was somebody that you could tell, first talking about Rio, he would beam. And we're going to have Rio on the show this week, and they're really looking forward to it. But it was more that he wasn't just a journalist, and he did his job so well. It's that he had a passion for baseball that just came through. And how often do you see somebody, we all have jobs, but Pedro seemed to have a passion for his job that I hadn't seen in many people.
No, it's so easy to get cynical. And I think I've been guilty over the years. And when I switched from covering baseball to doing investigative stuff, and both of us are writing about doping. And, when I started this business, I was in Chicago, and, he was in the Bay Area, and then I was in New York, and he was in Arizona, but we still talked probably every day. And we'd argue over things. We were together through the Barry Bonds stuff, and Pedro, my God, the amount of abuse that he took from people in San Francisco, because he was reporting, critically, not unfairly, about Bonds and what was going on with him. And he would stand in there and take it because he knew that his job was right. And I wrote a column some years ago saying, I gave up my Hall of Fame vote and talked about why. And one of the things I mentioned is that Bonds and Clemens should probably be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not sure I want to put them in. Pedro was passionate that they not be. He was always like, I will never vote for a guy who cheated, because he really had that passion for the game itself and for the guys who did it the right way. And, he would scream at me, how can you feel that way? But yeah, it was, he never wrote a word. I never wrote a cynical word. He never wrote anything to get attention. It's because it came straight from his heart.
So now the Pedro Gomez Foundation was created to honor his legacy. It offers lots of different initiatives. You have a summer internship now at the Arizona Republic. You have fundraisers with Pedro Palooza. Tell us about the foundation and how people can support some of these initiatives.
The foundation is great. I'm unbelievably honored to be a board member. Pedro's wife, Sandy, is the president of the board, and she asked me to do that. And it's really something, because the people who are part of it have the same passion for Pedro that he had for everything that he did. We've got scholarship at Arizona State with the Cronkite School of Communications and Journalism. We've got a scholarship that we do with the University of Arizona, which is where Rio pitched, for ball players, because there's not a lot of scholarship money for even top D1 baseball schools. And we've got this internship that we're incredibly proud of. It's a 10-week paid internship with the Arizona Republic. We want to expand it if we can. Pedro Palooza is the private event fundraiser gala that we're doing, but we also have got an auction that the public can participate in that's got some amazing items. Rio, as he took over our social media, he just today assigned Aaron Judge ball. He had an Albert Pujols bat yesterday. Tons of memorabilia: Yankees, Red Sox, Arizona State, University of Arizona, Royal. Stuff from George Brett on there. There are packaged things at Fenway and Yankee Stadium with the Miami Heat. It's pretty good. I'm going to slip into huckster mode here. Tons of gift ideas for people. But the money's all, we got almost no overhead in the foundation. The money's going right into these projects. Yeah, you can check out the Pedro Gomez Foundation website. And also on Twitter, Pedro's family converted his personal Twitter page to the foundation. So look for Pedro Gomez Foundation. The auction's running through Saturday, I think, 11 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, really, really cool items on there.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to talking to Rio. We've heard so much about him directly from Pedro when he would talk about him and his own journey through baseball. One of the other things we wanted to talk to you about was you've been involved in a lot of big stories lately. One of the biggest is Brittany Griner. What was it like for you to cover that story, and how hard is it when you have a story that is that emotional not to get involved in it yourself?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's super emotional, and not just because of what's at stake. We treat in the sports world, and I've been as guilty of this as anybody, little things like trades and injuries as matters of national security and like their life and death. Well, this is a story where it was literally an issue of national security with somebody's life potentially at risk. And it changed the way you covered it from the beginning, because you recognized that we didn't know this at the beginning, but that she was potentially part of an international hostage standoff. Was she being treated as someone who violated a crime, who's being given due process, or is she simply a hostage chit for the Russian government? It became obvious pretty quickly that it was the latter, that they were looking to use her for leverage for a deal. And we usually, as a reporter, you want as much information as you can to get it out there, but you had to recognize that sometimes what you were hearing from Russia was propaganda. And you couldn't independently confirm a lot of what was going on, because I couldn't just pick up and go to Russia. There was discussion for about 2 hours of whether that would be possible, and the State Department advised that was, I believe the words were, a spectacularly bad idea. So, we had to be really, really cautious with our coverage. And then anytime I tweeted anything on that story, look, I've done stuff involving college sports, which is the same thing as writing about religion. And, you get some incredible reactions. But with this, it's part of the Russian social media bot machine, where all of a sudden it would be 6 a.m. in Moscow, and all these accounts that have been created within the last month that have, no photo, and they have no followers, and they're all repeating the exact same talking points. And their point is to just stir up things in U.S. domestic politics. And so you had to be aware all the time that, this larger game that was going on between these governments. And what big lesson for me throughout was reminding myself, I don't know what I don't know. I heard tons of speculation about this throughout from people who there's no way they knew what was going on in these negotiations. We know at the end of the day, she was traded for Victor Bout, this man who was doing a 25-year sentence for supporting terrorism. He was an arms trafficker, but we don't know what else was part of that deal. That's what happens in hostage, trades like that. So there was kind of a humility to it as well, that as much as you tried to report, you never knew how much of the picture you were missing.
You talk about serious stories. Another one that you had, you covered the Tyler Skaggs tragedy. This week we saw Artie Moreno decide that he's not going to sell the team. Can you talk about how Moreno, the organization, and baseball itself was shaped by what happened with Tyler Skaggs?
Well, they became a really quick, really early on, an issue of liability. There was the tragedy of the death, and you saw how that affected people immediately. I mean, his teammates, the people around him, fans were devastated. This was a young man in his prime, coming back from injuries, very popular with his teammates, in a drug-related death. And it was a devastating story. But then there were questions of, well, who knew what? You had a team employee who was involved, Eric Kay, who, many of us in the business have known for years, super nice guy. Turned out Eric had a long-term opioid addiction, and that he had potentially given Skaggs the drugs that he took the night he died. So you have the question of, is there going to be a criminal trial? Does he have some criminal liability, but also civil liability? And I spoke not long after, early on, I found out that Eric Kay was involved and was the target of a DEA investigation. And I spoke to his mother at great length, who, I was really cautious. This is not a person used to dealing with the media. She's a private citizen. And I made sure she clearly understood she was speaking on the record. But she said, no, I want people to know about what his addiction has done to our family. And she spoke openly, saying that Eric's boss at the time, Tim Mead, knew about this addiction, knew about the relationship, that Eric Kay and Tyler Skaggs had done drugs together. And that suddenly put a target on the team. Now Major League Baseball was interested in, wait a second, does the organization have some liability and some culpability? And Tyler Skaggs' family ended up, there's still a lawsuit with the Angels. And so Artie Moreno, if the civil litigation plays out and anybody determines that there is, the team had some culpability in Tyler Skaggs' death, then Artie Moreno's on the hook as the owner, and he's also still faces potential punishment from the Angels. But it also showed, you had player after player coming into that trial in Fort Worth back in February, talking about their own use and how much of it there was. And Major League Baseball realized we have got a real issue with opioids. And with some of these guys, it was recreational. They were crushing it and snorting it and partying. But a lot of them, as Tyler Skaggs' family said, it came from injuries and trying to deal with the pain, like way too many Americans. So it's something that tied the organization, had one to grieve the loss of this player, but also recognize, some of this may be coming back on us. So I haven't looked at where the lawsuit stands recently. Eric Kay, for those who don't remember, it was tried with causing, charged in federal court with causing Tyler Skaggs' death. He was found guilty in February, which surprised a lot of people. And he is doing a minimum 22-year sentence for it. It's the repercussions of this are going to last a very long time.
Yeah. The one thing that when I read some of your stories, I tend to ask myself a question that I don't think a lot of people think about, which is when do you decide what to report and what not to? So in the Skaggs story, you went to the mom and asked her about certain things that were sensitive. With regard to Brittany Griner, it's even more higher stakes for you, because you have to decide what you're going to report and how that's going to literally affect whether she's released or not released.
Yeah, I mean, it was you. Hopefully, in this business, you're always thinking of not just about what's the story, what's the reaction going to be, but what are the consequences of it? Because these are people's lives, and even if I'm writing about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and their drug trials, I still always, at the end of the day, would remind myself these are human beings, and even if they did what they were accused of, whether it's right or wrong, however you feel, they're still people. They still have families. Just bear that in mind. And in this case, same thing. You have the Skaggs family, which was devastated. You have the Kay family that was devastated. With his mom, I wanted to know more about him. I also spoke to his now ex-wife, Cammie, and asked her about what they had been through, because it wasn't just a story about a PR guy for a team and a ball player who were using drugs. It's about what the addiction did to their families. And so I reached out. I was really low key about it. I said, if you're interested in speaking, I would love to hear what you have to say. I'd love to know, what this has meant to your family. And you're asking somebody to trust you. They have no control over what I write. They have no control over what the reaction is. And so when I'm dealing with Eric Kay's mother, who, I mean, again, it's not like a ball player or a team executive where they live in the media and they know the game and they know, they've got a level of sophistication. This is somebody who did not. And so that's why I over and over made sure she understood what she was saying. Had she thought about the consequences? And after the story ran, and it got obviously a ton of attention, and I reached out to her and said, I just want to see how you are. And if you have anything to say, whether, good, bad, or indifferent, if you want to scream at me, whatever, please say whatever you have to. And she wrote back, I can't bring myself to read it, but I'm hearing from a lot of friends and family, and they all say it's fair. And that's all I could ask. And that was a big, big deal to me. With Brittany Griner, there were things that I had heard that were great news stories, but you had to recognize that it's in Russia's interest to generate a ton of attention in this country. Every time there was a protest, every time somebody got mad at the White House or the State Department, it was good for Russia. And I can't make a decision based on, the interests of the Biden White House or the United States, as an entity. It's what serves the reader. But at the same time, recognizing that this could jeopardize her it could mean she's in prison there longer. And if that's the case, is it worth writing this? And you didn't do it because, it wasn't a patriotic thing. It's because there's a social consequence to what you're doing. It affects people's lives. Our job's not to carry water for the United States government. It's you can look objectively at what Russia's done and Ukraine have some pretty strong feelings about it. But I also knew objectively from having covered that country, having been there 5 years ago and reported from there, that their justice system is transactional. It is not justice, that it is used for political purposes and for geopolitical purposes. And so if I erred on any side, it was a side on not feeding into the fire that could, I would remind people, I was doing, shows on ESPN all day long. And, people would talk about, free Brittany, let's get her home. Like, okay, you can make that point. That's not my job. My job is not to advocate. My job is to report so people can make their own set of decisions. And you just had to remind yourself all the time of what that larger mission was.
TJ Quinn, we could talk to you all day. This was fascinating. We're going to have to run for now. I hope we get to talk to you again. First, thank you so much for what you're doing with the Pedro Gomez Foundation. People can get more information at pedrogomezfoundation.org. Thank you for keeping his legacy alive and for joining us to talk about this and much more.
No, thanks for letting me. I mean, there's no hokum in this. It is an unbelievable honor to be able to keep doing this in his name. I miss my friend so much. Every time The Godfather is on, every time somebody in baseball does something, every time, The Sopranos is on a rerun, every time my kids do something, I want to pick up the phone. And this is a way to kind of keep them alive. So thank you guys for letting me.
We'll make sure to put it out on our social accounts too. Thank you.